Hi, welcome to the Connection Podcast. I'm Lauren Dry, also known as the Connection Catalyst. Connection and this podcast for me is personal. As a driven professional, I found myself an expert in all things work and business, but it was at home that I really needed clarity and ease. After finally finding that, one marriage breakdown and one marriage reset later, and finally discovering what really works to have connection in modern relationships using science, simplicity, and soul, our signature program, Rise into Regulation, was born. That's giving so many others in modern driven relationships back clarity and ease for good. On the podcast today, we're going to dive deep together on all things relationships, business, identity, and leadership. Clarity and ease is the heart of it all. And we are so happy to be with you so that you can have what you need in connection, mind, body, and soul too. I am so happy to be with you today. This is our official relaunch episode. So we're going to cover some questions together. But before we go dive deep, I really want to talk about something that I've lived, and I know so many of you have too. That's the moment where you are standing in the middle of your relationship, trying to talk about how you feel, and suddenly you hear yourself sounding like you are in a performance review. You know, you're there in the kitchen, your heart is racing and you feel on edge, but the words coming out of your mouth sound like, oh, I just think that we need clearer expectations around our shared responsibilities, or it would really help if you could acknowledge the emotional labor that I'm putting in, or I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying that this dynamic doesn't feel sustainable. So the thing is, on the surface, this sounds mature, so emotionally intelligent. But the thing is, underneath, your body is screaming, because what you really want to say is something like, do you even see me right now? I'm drowning and no one is noticing, or I'm scared that this feeling of disconnection is going to become our new normal. But you won't say that because somewhere along the line, you've learned that being polished is safer than being vulnerable, and that clarity is more respectable than need. So if you present your pain professionally, maybe it won't be dismissed, or worse, your pain won't be used against you. That's not just a communication style, it's a trauma adaptation. It's what happens when your system has been trained to stay one step ahead. When you've spent years learning how to speak in a way that won't trigger someone else, when being understood became less important than being controlled enough not to get hurt. And I used to do this a lot in arguments and in conflict and in intimacy. I'd be using all of the right words, and I knew all the right words. I'd been through it, but nothing was landing for either of us. Because I wasn't speaking from regulation, I was speaking from hypervigilance, from a frozen body pretending to be calm, or someone who just learned that if you just say it right, maybe they'll stay. And it's wild because when I finally learned how to drop into my body and how to pause long enough to actually feel what I was feeling, how to track the part of me that was bracing for rejection before the sentence even left my mouth, that's where things actually got simple. They became easier, simpler, and softer. I didn't lose my clarity. It just meant I wasn't performing it anymore. And when I started speaking from that place, from my actual body, not just my brain on hyperdrive, my words didn't need to be perfect because they were true. And the people who could meet me there finally heard me. And that's what this whole episode is about today. Not just how to say the thing, but to how to feel safe enough to say the real thing. Whether you are dating again after 15 years, trying to rebuild with someone who seems like they have narcissistic traits, navigating emotional numbness, or just trying to find one small moment of calm in a stress-filled life. So today we're going to do things a little bit differently. I have a few questions from some of the wonderful people I've been connecting with over on Instagram at Lauren_Dry. So the first question that has been put in for us to cover is, how do you build a healthy relationship with a narcissist without losing yourself? I wanted to start with this one first because it's pretty powerful language. How do I retry? How do I restart? How do I even figure out if I should try and restart a relationship or a connection or even a conversation with someone who seems like they have narcissistic tendencies? Now, I want to touch on something that may come as a bit of a surprise to anyone who's been in any kind of narcissistic connection before. It could feel like something that popped up in a friendship. It could feel like something that popped up with a family member, a parent. And it definitely can be something that feels like you are aware has been present in a relationship currently or even in the past. Narcissism is a powerful word, and it's a very real experience to be on the receiving end of. So I just want to pause and acknowledge that before we kind of dive deep. We're going to cover some nuance, some of the gray, and that's tricky to do when you've been in tough situations where you've been dismissed, where you've been minimized, where you've been gaslit, where you have found yourself questioning your own reality and have even been on the receiving end of cruelty or emotional cruelty and find yourself doubting your own reality. 1 minute feeling like you're on cloud nine and the next the ground is missing from underneath your feet. So there's two parts to this question. One, how do I know how to rebuild? And two is the narcissism aspect. First and foremost, being on the receiving end, as I've just said, of narcissism is real. The challenge that we need to find, though, and why so many people come to us at Rise, is that when you have been in a repeating pattern of being in a relationship with multiple people who perhaps have narcissistic tendencies, the most powerful thing that you can actually do is get curious about what it is in your own patterning that creates this repeated dynamic. Now, the most common reflection that matches being in narcissistic relationships is actually codependency. So if you find that you're a people pleaser, someone who's very generous, someone who's very conscious and committed to the things that you want and desire, and you find that it's not appreciated, not only is it not appreciated, perhaps it's thrown back at you for all the effort that you make. It's a really healthy moment in time to just pause, focus on things like somatics and down-regulating your nervous system, and get curious about what the dynamics are, what are the patterns that maybe your nervous system has learned that find this dynamic so familiar. So on the surface, if we were going to go super high level here about what type of person ends up in a narcissistic relationship regularly, what it looks like is one person who struggles with that emotional articulation and safety, but the other person who gains, their nervous system has been trained through trauma patterning, through old stored habits and behaviors that allowed them to feel a sense of achievement and perhaps validation in the past, that they find a sense of nervous system safety, a sense of familiarity with that run and chase dynamic. So there is an unconscious desire to achieve or succeed in a relationship or in a conversation where other people maybe haven't been able to. So if you are able to get love and care and attention from that one person that, seems unattainable or challenging, that can validate to you something that a wound that may have happened when you were much younger, where an unconscious part of you decided or learned that you were difficult to love or you were difficult to care for. Whether it was true or not, a lot of the time we develop adaptive behaviors that help us to cope. And when they work well, we cling on to them. And so it becomes a repeating pattern, a repeating dynamic. How can I feel better about myself by gaining a sense of achievement in difficult conversations, in difficult relationships? So in terms of how can you repair with someone who have these tendencies, I think the most important question that I would ask you first is, are you aware of the dynamic in the past and the patterning in the past that maybe has led to this being something that you feel like you need to work really, really hard at? Can it be repaired? Can the person with narcissistic tendencies have big awakenings and big ground shifting revelations that allow them to drop into softness and empathy and kindness and true connection? Absolutely. And I have seen it. I've seen it multiple times, and it's a beautiful ground shifting dynamic. I think in terms of how do you focus on repairing if you are on the other side, though, is to find out where that unconscious dynamic is feeding into the dance. Okay, where that codependent patterning that says, I can't be happy unless you're happy, versus how can I down regulate my own self so I find out what's important to me and can speak from a place of deep security and regulation so that the conversation that we're having actually has somewhere to go, as opposed to a sense of achievement around, okay, we've finally come back on the same page, but do we want to be on the same page? I think that's the most important question. But when it comes to navigating and seeing how to repair with someone who has these tendencies is the most important step. Because if you just focus on repair of the relationship for the sake of repairing the relationship, you'll end up in this situation again. So what I would invite you to do is get a little bit uncomfortable in a healthy way. Do the work now around finding out what is a healthy need, what is a healthy desire, what is healthy communication versus just making it work. And this is something that we can do on our own. We don't have to wait for the other person. And that way, when you end up in these toxic cycles and you're feeling gaslit and starting to doubt yourself, you have a lot of strength and security around not getting dragged into the dance of feeling like you were talking about the dishes, but then in the next minute, we're talking about the theology on how dishes should be stacked, which is a dance that can happen in these kinds of dynamic relationships where you feel crazy. You feel like you're going around in circles when all you want to do is talk about the dishes. If you're in your center of gravity, you're able to shortcut that really fast. So in terms of what I would do if I was in that situation, and I have felt like I've been in these dynamics before, and I have felt that desire to kind of over lean in and over fix and try and make things better. Get into your grounding, get curious about the patterns underneath. Those hidden patterns are in charge of 95% of our habits, behaviors, and relationships. So it is the most empowering thing that we can do. I'd start there. Okay, the second question we had was, what are the tips that I would give for dating again 15 years after being divorced? And girl, I take my hat off to you. I know that you've been through a lot. Not only have you been through a lot, but you've given back a lot, you've poured into your family, and you have so much to be proud of. I would, in terms of what tips I would give you to around how to get back into dating again, I would start first of all by building almost a values map. When you first start dating again, your body, hormones, they can really get in the mix, and your hidden patterning. So exactly what we were just mentioning around why do codependents choose narcissists? I would get curious about how you can build a bit of a values map and not, okay, he needs to have a job, he needs to do all of those things. That's great. What I would concentrate on is more of your core values. So what does kindness look like to you if that's one of your core values? I would also focus on really making sure that this is something that you live day to day. Sometimes when we have a desire that we're looking for in someone else, let's, for example, use calm. If we're looking for calm tone in communication, but we're not often holding our own selves accountable for how we talk and not getting curious about how our statements land. And this can sound like, if you find that often you're someone who says, I'm just being honest. If you're bothered by the way I'm talking, I'm just being honest. This is a really powerful reflection of you may not feel comfortable and you might not feel safe asking for calm in relationships around you because you don't yet have that deep, bone deep security within your body of, hey, I know what it looks like, I know what it feels like, and I practice it, and I know how to sit in the discomfort of that, which allows you to have empathy for other people who struggle with speaking calmly, but you also do not pass go, do not collect $200, do not have any conversations if they don't meet that value for you, and you can hold that boundary from a place of deep calm and security. So I would get super clear, do a bit of values mapping. You can come talk to me about this anytime. I have some similar podcast episodes where we dive really deep into values mapping. It's a pretty funny episode about fighting with my husband over a gift card. So I would start there first and make sure you have a clear picture, not of who the person looks like, not even of the things that they say, but how you're looking to feel when you're with them, and get familiar with the difference between an activated trauma response, which feels like excitement, really, really big butterflies, very intense love very, very quickly, which can absolutely be the beginning of something real and powerful. But if you don't also have the ability to discern the difference between butterflies and an activated nervous system that recognizes a familiar trauma pattern versus attraction, desire, and a nervous system that feels deeply safe, deeply rested. You may find yourself just in the same pattern again. I don't think that you will. It sounds like if you've taken this much time in between dating, you've probably done a little bit of work, but I would practice leaning into healthy discomfort. Okay, how can I play with the difference between a nervous system that's activated because this is a trauma pattern that feels familiar with this person versus, oh, okay, this feels a little stretchy. Maybe I'm stretching myself outside of my comfort zone. This feels risky, but it's a level of risk I'm willing to bear because we all deserve connection. We all deserve comfort. Something I reference so often, and you'll hear me repeat it over and over again, is the longest study ever done by Harvard. I think it's 70 plus years ongoing, that the strongest indicator, the strongest factor that gives you physical health, mental health, and satisfaction, so happiness in life, is not what we have and what we achieve and what we accomplish. It's the strength of our closest relationships. So go you for jumping back in after 15 years. What a beautiful adventure. Make sure that you keep making space for you and getting curious around that. Third and second to last question, when everything in life feels stress-filled, how do you ever find a space to feel safe? Yeah. For this one, I would refer you to my Hypervigilance podcast just to try and figure out what part of you feels safe in the chaos. And I know this sounds counterintuitive, but I tend to look for really powerful words in questions. And I see in your question, when everything in life feels stress-filled, what I'm identifying is that there is a real familiarity for your nervous system to gain a sense of safety around this pattern of busyness. So busyness is something that we can feel like has been taken out of our control, taken away from our ability to manage. But it is also really, really important that if we are aware of what our value pillars are, we have a sense of grounding and we have like a Bible to work from around how to build our life. Now, having a stress-filled season, I mean, I'm right there with you. You know, I understand what it means to have life feel completely overwhelming and as though, you know, everything's outside of your control. We went through a season even so recently around how it felt like there just wasn't any quality time together. We were juggling a ton of really full-on investments. My husband owns a business as well. We wanted to make sure that we were taking care of our kids and making sure we were making the right decisions for them with their education, for their health. And it just didn't seem like we had 10 seconds to breathe, you know, and it just didn't seem like it was going to stop. There was so much, it was one after the other. And if you are a business owner, if you're someone who has a high level of responsibility in any business or even in the home, you'll really relate to this. You know, it is an honor and a privilege. It's also a big responsibility, but it does take conscious attention to make sure that it doesn't overwhelm you. And if you've ever come across the SMART system, I definitely recommend looking into that and just making sure that the levels of stress that you have in your life right now actually do have a plan, with the SMART all standing for something, but the most important one at the end being time, T for time. I was just having this discussion with my clients this morning. If you are finding yourself completely overwhelmed and life is absolutely operating at its max, what is the time frame that you're willing to accept this for? So operating at that level for my husband and I, we have specific deadlines and time frames where we say, okay, this is a health check. Is this sustainable and can we manage this? And if we can't and it's feeling like it's a real stretch for our nervous system, there is a deadline where it must change, and it must change either in this direction or this direction. But we make sure that we don't ever make these deadlines negotiable. It could be a month by month deadline. So let's say by June, July, I'm going to hit this goal and this goal. And if not, we are going to make this change to our lifestyle. So if you don't have those kinds of deadlines, and if you don't honor those kinds of deadlines, what you're doing is training your nervous system to sustain this level of stress. And there is nothing more dangerous to our health long term than staying in a sustained level of stress. If we can't switch down into parasympathetic, so parasympathetic is rest and digest, it's the signal that turns onto our body that it's safe to connect, safe to be physically intimate, safe to be happy. But also if we switch off that parasympathetic nervous system and we stay in fight, flight, fawn, freeze, our survival state, we also switch off three of the most important components that are required for our body to have health. So the first is learning. How can I learn how to do better? How can I adapt? The second is our digestion system. So that's why you may have digestion and skin issues. So it's either going to slow down or, it's going to go into complete overdrive, or you have a lot of stomach pain. So anything to do with digestion really gets affected. But the third thing that gets switched off is actually healing. If you feel like a tiger is chasing you, will your body really think that it's an appropriate time to be pausing and healing? No, you're going to be focused on all the adrenaline, all the cortisol, and things will start to physically break down. So how do you ever find time and space to heal? How do you find time and space to feel safe? We recognize that we only do get one life, and that there are a lot of things that are going to be on your plate that feel like an emergency. And when you are in a state of fight or flight, everything will feel like an emergency. Even if it's a kid's shoes on the floor, I've spoken about this before. So I would challenge your nervous system and take, even if it's just 5 minutes in the car before you get into the house, pause and have a real life catalog about what actually is an emergency. And if everything does feel like an emergency, that's when you ask for help, which if you are used to being independent, used to doing things on your own, used to getting that kick of achievement from being independent, that's going to be really, really hard. But what I tell my clients is don't feel like you have to reach for comfort and safety. Reach for healthy discomfort, because one journey and one pathway will take you to discomfort. And that's scary and that's overwhelming and stress-filled, is what you said. So we've got a guarantee down that path. But the second path of doing nothing actually keeps you on the first path. So that's the lie that our nervous system tells us. If we just freeze or fight, flight, fawn, freeze, eventually we'll get off this path. And it's not true. It's a coping strategy. It was never meant to problem solve. Problem solving happens when you're downregulated. And in order to do that, you need to lovingly challenge the beliefs and the internal dialogue that says the world is quite literally ending right now. So in terms of how do you ever find a space to feel safe, you make it, and you make it your priority, because you are only given one life. Even if it's the 5-minute window, even if it's a 24-hour window, gift yourself that, because the time will pass anyway. And if you need any help, you need any support, that's exactly what I'm here for. I would love to go a bit deeper. Come hang out with me on Instagram. Last question. Could you please talk about being emotionally numb and how this doesn't always equal falling out of love? I love this question. It was another one that I was talking about with one of my clients today. The question that she asked me was, how do you know the difference between your intuition and your protective behaviors, your protective parts? And her challenge at the moment is things are really good in her relationship. They've come really far and they've come back from the brink, and it's something to be celebrated and something to be honored. But her body hasn't caught up yet. Her body hasn't caught up. She's not feeling like she's ready to be intimate. She's feeling wary. She's feeling on edge. Does this mean that they'll never work out, even though he's changed dramatically, even though things seem to be going well? And what I said to her was, whenever I hear the question, is it my protective behavior? Is it a fight, flight, fawn, freeze response? Or is it my intuition? And is this something I should follow? I always say, I always ask the question, what is the greatest block to connection? Most importantly, the greatest block to connection for our own selves. And that is shame. Shame is the greatest block to resolving any connection challenge, whether it's a challenge at work, challenge with our kids, and especially a challenge in our relationship. So if we find that we have a level of intensity and we find that we're blocking ourselves off from someone, and they've done the work and we've done the work, and on the surface, everything looks great, what we might be tempted to do is shame ourselves into not appreciating it or valuing it. But if we've done a lot of work and our body is talking to us, the very first thing that we need to avoid is shaming ourselves out of that physiological response. There's wisdom in the fight, flight, fawn, freeze response. So if you are feeling locked down and shut off from your partner and you are feeling emotionally numb, the first question I would actually ask is, where's the wisdom in it? Especially for women. So if you haven't listened to my ick episode yet, you should definitely jump on over and listen to that, because what's required for women to feel emotionally connected enough to have physical intimacy with their partner is safety. So if we don't feel safe, we will shut down, and it'll feel like the love isn't there, the connection isn't there, the spark isn't there. But safety for women, emotional safety especially, begins when we have shame not making the decisions even in our own minds, even in our own bodies. We don't shame ourselves out of feeling disconnected. So if we are feeling disconnected, the very first question I would ask is, what's the loving purpose? Because the boundaries that are required in a relationship, so masculine containment, that dependability is incredibly attractive because we know what to expect. Predictability is a version of safety, which is why if things seem good on the surface and you haven't had a fight for a while, but you're worried that it'll come soon, it'll almost feel like a relief when it does happen. Because at least then you'll know, okay, this is how they behave when things are going south. You have predictability, you know how to navigate it, but the space in between can feel very dangerous, which is where that desire to almost antagonize a fight may come from. So if you are feeling emotionally numb, I would lean into it and find out what doesn't feel safe. Do you feel like you're avoiding a problem? Choose healthy discomfort. Try and have that difficult conversation. If you need support with those communication techniques, reach out. That's what we're here for. But I would get really, really curious around the wisdom of that emotional numbness, okay? Because you are right. It doesn't mean that you're falling out of love, but there is absolutely such a huge depth of wisdom in that response. And the wisdom is trying to discover and create new boundaries. Where can I rest when things do go wrong? Because if we start to trick ourselves into thinking things are going to be fine as long as nothing goes wrong, it's a long life. Something's going to go wrong. That's the only guarantee that you have, whether it's really tough stuff like grief, someone passing away, confusions and debates over honesty and integrity. You know, is that a lie? Did you break the boundaries of trust in our relationship, you know, on a big or a little scale? Parenting, if you have kids, that's a lifetime journey of challenging what you know about yourselves and what you know about each other and how to keep the most important people close to you safe, sometimes even safe from your own unconscious patterns and behaviors. So I would lean into that emotional numbness and find out what it is trying to learn, what kind of boundary it is trying to rediscover, and lean into healthy discomfort so that you can have the conversation and get some security before your unconscious mind creates the blow up, or before you have to wait for the worst time possible to figure out what it looks like when things go wrong in your relationship, because they will. And that's just what we sign up for. We don't sign up for perfection. We sign up for security though. We sign up for clarity and ease, and that's absolutely what you can get when you have predictability, and that's what we all want. And play. And play happens when you feel safe enough to make jokes, to fall in love again, and to have that friendship and that intimacy back. I want to thank you so much for being here for our relaunch episode. I have had such a ball. It has been such a joy being in this podcast and being able to relaunch with you and share your questions as well in this space. It's such a privilege and such a blessing. And I want to thank you for being here. And anytime you need support, if you want to go a bit deeper and find out anything about our RISE program, please come and find us on Instagram at Lauren_dry. We have changed. It is no longer on Instagram at the.connection.catalyst. So very big changes, a lot of more personal touch coming back into the podcast, which we've always loved weaving in and out. And it is such a joy to have that evolution with you. And I can't wait to take you along the journey and find out about connection together, all of the ups and the downs and all of the richness there. So I'll see you soon.